everybody, welcome to BrickVault. Today I get to show you guys a LEGO custom build of probably one of the coolest Starfighters from Star Wars that's ever been around. Coming in right at the end of the Clone Wars, this is the Aggressive Reconnaissance 170 Starfighter, the ARC-170. And right off the bat, I gotta say, the name Reconnaissance, it doesn't really fit the overall style of this ship. It's one of the largest and heaviest Starfighters that's ever existed within the Star Wars universe. It has absolutely massive cannons. It was, I think, the first or among the very first of the ships to have S-foils, and it also includes a co-pilot as well as a rear gunner, which is super unique for any of the ships that have ever appeared in Star Wars. The reality is this thing was super heavy, could also pack a massive punch, and according to the description at least, those large laser cannons could be said to pierce the armor of capital ships. So aggressive certainly fits the name, but the only thing that pertains to reconnaissance with this vehicle is really the heavy sensors that you see on the nose. At the end of the day, this thing looks a lot like the A-10 Warthog, and that is enough for me to like the ship hands down anyways. So let's get into the custom build of this model. The design came from Thomas Jenkins, and if you wanted to build this exact ship yourself, you can find the PDF step-by-step building guide at our web store. That's www.brickvault.toys. Included with each purchase are the PDF step-by-step building instructions, as well as a digital parts list that you can upload online, and you order the parts that you would need for this thing immediately. We've been having a blast working on builds from the Clone Wars era recently, and Thomas, the designer, really put in a lot of extra time to make this thing a bit stronger in certain areas, so the model both looks great and holds together pretty well. Any support you guys throw our way is greatly appreciated here at the channel, and it's also an awesome way to help support the incredibly talented builders that we work with, like Thomas. Starting right off the bat, I'm flashing by a bunch of other LEGO minifig scale Star Wars builds, and you can see how the ARC-170 compares to the rest of the ships. It is basically the biggest Starfighter, pretty much. I mean, the dimensions are always kind of interesting if you had to compare the B-Wing or U-Wing or something like that, but at the end of the day, this thing is certainly on the top 3 list, I would say, in terms of size. The ship contains a crew of 3. That would be a pilot, co-pilot, or weapons assistant, as well as a rear gunner, and that also doesn't include the Astromech at the top. So, like so many of these custom build videos before in the past, let's get into the functions first, before anything else. Like you might be able to guess, of course, you can fit all 3 of the figs into the ship. Starting at the first seat, you can just take the windscreen off there that are attached by the 2 studs, and there's a little basic interior, just some detailing for a seat, as well as a couple of control sticks. The pilot can sit down inside the ship without having to stud into anything, so this guy's pretty easy to get into the ship. And I like the little brick built housing of slope and cheese wedge pieces that matches up with the back part of the windscreen there. This next bit of the design for the co-pilot or weapons assistant, the windscreen actually rests in between some toothed-in areas, so there's no studding there. It actually rests slightly loose. And then if you can take a look at the pilot here, this is the shape of the body that he has to be in order to fit into this back seat. So with the legs bent forward a little bit and the arms slightly back, he's actually kind of wedged pretty snug between some of those black bricks at the bottom, and that guy is not going anywhere. He actually fits quite snug just with the tension of the bricks. When all said and done, both pilot and co-pilot rest roughly the same distance between their helmets and the top of the windscreens, which I like a lot. And when it comes to the rear gunner, he fits in very much the same way the initial pilot does, where he does not actually stud in, but there's certainly enough tension to keep him sitting there without wiggling around. He's got a little bit of detailing for some control pieces there for operating that back cannon, and there you have it for the 3 pilots. Now for the second function, we've got the landing gear. It's funny, I didn't know what this looked like until pretty recently with the Clone Wars 2019 trailer, and only then and there did I ever see what the actual landing gear looked like on one of these ships, with 2 very close together narrow feet in the back and 1 foot right under the nose, kind of similar to how an X-Wing or a lot of Starfighters really work. And I think Thomas did an excellent job integrating these legs into the build. Number 1, you can actually push the model around pretty easily. It's not like they're flimsy. As long as the surface is smooth, the legs aren't going to fold in accidentally or break off in any awkward way. It's a pretty solid connection. Also, you can see here I'm trying to to wobble the 170 over on its side. The legs in the back are super narrow, so it does want to tip easily, but the wings are just so incredibly long that there's no way for the ship to actually tip over. Righto, so there it is for the landing gear close up. This isn't the handling section of the video, not just yet. I just wanted to show you guys how the landing gear folds in. It's all pretty straightforward. The feet pretty much ratchet vertical and they fold into the back socket pretty well, and then the double ski pieces in the front fold forward and the whole leg comes back, being slightly exposed still. The 170 has a really big bottom platform, so you can easily lay the ship down flat if you wanted to just put it down without needing the landing gear. But then for such an amazing looking model, you want to be able to display it, or a lot of people do. So Thomas went ahead and made a really nice little display stand that studs into the dark gray 4 studs there, that studs into the back part of the display, which is a pretty firm connection, but nothing super strong. You can add more stud points of connection if you want, but personally I think the 4 is plenty. Now of course you can open up the S foils once you've got a bit of ground clearance. I think I opened them maybe a little bit too wide, a little bit too tall of an angle here for the bottoms and tops. But what's nice is here is that there's a ton of friction. These wings are definitely not going to be falling down on accident. They keep their place really well, and I think Thomas made the right design choice, so to speak, when choosing to make the primary wings out of bricks built on their sides and then a 2-plate thick build for either of the top and bottom S foils. So here's just another shot of the brick built wing. I can definitely appreciate the inclusion of that arch piece with the plate that's been clipped in, and then from a more level view you can see how close the bottom wings get to be flush with the actual brick built part of the center wing. It maybe isn't 100% touching perfectly flush against that build, but considering the detail of this area and success of the function, I say that's pretty much as good as you can get for a Lego model like this. All in all, the ship looks absolutely excellent with the folded open attack position like this. This shot lets you see a little bit more of the bottom ship and how the sort of flat belly of the ARC-170 molds pretty seamlessly into the body of the ship. And now we've gone through all of the functions really, so let's get into details. The large blasters of the ARC-170 are only held on by a couple of studs, and even the main tube of the cannon was intentionally built without a flexi tube on the inside. There is space for that in the openings if you really wanted to add a flexi tube, add a little bit more strength to the cannon, but personally we like to think of it as a safety net here within the studio, because they do stick out so far they could get easily wrapped around on jackets, and instead of flinging the model to the side, the cannon of the ARC-170 will just kind of snap off very easily and not, of course, shift the model or knock it over off the edge of the table, which it did before. So that was an hour-long mistake or so. So anyways, if you want to strengthen the cannon more, there certainly is space and you can fit a flexi tube in there, but we have not included that on this model for logistical reasons. Now, knocking out the last few bits of detailing, this is another look at the bottom foot. It's a super solid, very seamless looking build. And then here are the back thrusters. It's funny, they're a little bit wobbly in kind of a funny way. They connect to the build through a little bar piece, so they don't actually break off very easily. They just kind of have that funny little wobble. This is what the bottom gun looks like. There's a little bit of posability. It doesn't go from side to side, and then the same goes for the top gun as well, though it has a lot more detailing. Now, when it comes to the Astromech, I almost forgot to mention him earlier, but I think the reason why I didn't put him in with the pilots is because really during the build process, you actually build the robot into the model, and I wouldn't say you're supposed to be taking this guy in and out of the model so much just based on how these pieces come together. As you can see, there's a bit of looseness there. I'm not going to take this whole area apart, but needless to say, those side walls aren't totally studded in, but they have a way of hooking into the body and creating an extremely tight frame around your Astromech droid. Looks wise, I don't think this approach can be beat, and I think mentally you just have to think about the Astromech as being part of the model and not one of the figures that you should be taking in or out very often. Now, moving on to the inner side of the wings, we've got some amazing detailing here. Those grill pieces are wedged into that little round circular plate, and there's also one or two very odd connection points in this part of the build here as well. And then when I was putting together the engines here in the front, I thought they would be a lot weaker than they were, but the single points of connection for these little side walls here are balanced quite well, and I was really surprised to see how sturdy this overall part of the model was. But speaking of sturdiness, we might as well go through the handling handling section of this build. I would say there's a few main points where you should be picking up the model from, like I'm pinching this sort of narrow area. The plates on the top don't have as much traction, and then the whole area on the bottom foot and the inner wall there is a really, really good way to or area to hold the model from. Now, for the most part, you can tap just about any spot on the ship. It looks like I broke out a little bit of paneling. I'm going to see if I can rebuild that with just one hand, but let me take the time to say now that this model is pretty structurally sound through and through, but there are certainly areas of the model that you don't want to hit too hard. There's nothing that's super delicate, and I'm also really happy to say if anything does pop off, there are no frustrating rebuilds that I could find, especially after having smashed the whole thing. So I'm moving down the model again, kind of testing any of the areas that might pop off. The engines, I was super surprised to say that they actually stay on quite well when you build them. They really don't look like they would. The wings stay on well. We actually did a bit of redesign to make them stronger. I would suggest picking them up sort of from that back corner, but you can open and close them from the tip. The main build body of the primary wings, the middle wings, do not have any Technic lift arms cutting through the middle like you would see on the UCS Tidarium, for example. So just letting you know, if you do drop the model, the wings will shatter like you saw from the previous pictures. The nose is relatively strong. Maybe the tip of it is only held on by a couple of studs. And then from the bottom, I guess, yeah, you can open and close those little angled in areas by the foot. They're technically a little loose here, but enough tension to keep them from wobbling around. There's some gaps there by the back, but nothing has broken off actually from the back end that I can think of. And for the most part, this model is pretty much structurally solid through and through. After I get the landing gear open, let me just show you guys how the guns break off. They can disconnect by the two studs from the wing itself, and then also the entire length of the gun can just break away with that little pin piece. Remember, there is definitely a way to make that stronger if you choose, but yeah, that is basically how this whole model feels and looks in real life. So remember guys, if you did want to build this for yourself, the instructions can be found at our web store. That's www.brickvault.toys. Let me know what type of model you want to see us knock out in the future, and if you enjoy our content, you can always like or subscribe. So thanks a lot for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time at BrickVault.